Hi, listeners. It's hard to believe, but New Frontiers in Functional Medicine has been going strong since 2015. With over 200 episodes and over 2 million listens, we are growing every year. My goal is to continue to bring you the best minds in functional medicine, epigenetics, and longevity. I want the content to be actionable for the functional medicine clinician and interesting for the rest of us. Thank you for supporting this podcast with your likes, with your honest reviews, with sharing the episodes with your friends and family. And if you haven't done so, please consider leaving a like or leaving us an honest review wherever you've accessed this podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you to our sponsors. Because of our sponsors, these are companies that I trust, that we vet carefully, that we use in clinical practice, that I use personally. Because of them, everything associated with this podcast is free. If you haven't done so, I suggest you head over to drKF to the podcast page where you can access the full transcript for every single one of these 200 episodes. And along with that transcript, you'll get an episode summary. You can get the research citations and additional content that is pertinent to the episode. I myself return to the transcript page all the time to pull out a little snippet of information that I want to recall or access a citation. Or better yet, sign up for our newsletter, again, at drkarafitzgerald.com, and every single podcast episode will drop in your email as soon as it's released. Thanks again. Thank you to our Diamond Level sponsors, Biotics Research, Rupa Health, and Integrative Therapeutics. For over 40 years, the foundation of biotics research has been innovation and quality. Their goals remain unchanged: innovative ideas, carefully researched concepts, and product development with advanced analytical and manufacturing techniques. Biotics nutritional products are of superior quality and effectiveness. They're available exclusively to healthcare providers. Find them at bioticsresearch.com. I also want to give a shout out to our friends over at Rupa Health. They make lab testing easy, fabulous, doable for you, the clinician, and for you, the patient. Consider using Rupa as your super, super, super smart solution to all things laboratory testing. Visit them at rupahealth.com. For over 35 years, patients and clinicians have trusted Integrative Therapeutics for their dedication to quality, potency, and accuracy, and for bringing us exclusive products backed by science. From sourcing of premium raw materials to their meticulous manufacturing processes, they prioritize consistency, efficacy, and safety because our patients deserve nothing less. Find them at integrativepro.com. That's integrativepro.com. Thanks to our gold sponsors, Timeline and OneSkin. Timeline, fueling cellular energy for a lifetime of healthy aging. Find them at timelinenutrition.com. And OneSkin, skin age reversal technology. Find them at oneskin.co. Hi, everybody. Welcome to New Frontiers in Functional Medicine, where we are interviewing the best minds in functional medicine. And I am delighted to have the amazing Dr. Elisa Song back here on New Frontiers. Let me remind you who she is, and then we are going to jump into a tour de force conversation on all things pediatrics. So in 2005, the New England Journal of Medicine stated that for the first time in history, our children are expected to have shorter lifespans than us, their parents. The time to revolutionize pediatric medicine is now. Dr. Elisa Song, MD, is a Stanford, NYU, UCSF trained integrative pediatrician, pediatric functional medicine expert, and mom of 2 thriving and amazing kids. I added that amazing. And she's on a mission to revolutionize the future of children's health. Dr. Song is the best-selling author of Healthy Kids, Happy Kids, an integrative pediatrician's guide to whole child resilience. She created Healthy Kids, Happy Kids at I'll put the URL, we'll put the URL on the show notes, as an online holistic pediatric resource to help practitioners and parents bridge the gap between conventional and integrative pediatrics with an evidence-based, pediatrician-backed, mom-approved approach. In her integrative pediatric practice, she's helped thousands of kids get to the root cause of their health concerns and empowered parents to help their children thrive by integrating conventional peds with functional medicine, homeopathy, acupuncture, herbal medicine, and essential oils. She's lectured all over the world. She's been featured in every publication out there. She's got an awesome platform. I actually avidly follow her on Instagram. I love your posts, Elisa.
Oh, thank you.
Welcome. Welcome to New Frontiers. So listen, you went the very conventional route for your training, and you were probably I'm going to guess, tell me, anticipating moving into sort of a conventional pediatric role, but here you are, just really practicing this very smart, informed integrative medicine. So I just want to know your story and your, transition into this world.
Yeah. So, actually, I went into medicine thinking that I wanted to do something more holistic and integrative.
Awesome.
So, I mean,
And why is that? Like, what prompted that? Where's that piece of the story coming
well,
from?
it's like a series of weird circumstances, right? I mean, they say nothing in life is an accident, but when I was wandering around Stanford campus, I mean, I was probably all of like 19, 20, I was a junior. And I was all set. I had taken the LSATs. I was getting my applications for law school, and I was going to be a children's rights advocate, not even health, but just overall children's rights advocate. And I saw this flyer, on one of the telephone posts, and it was a flyer for the American Holistic Medical Association, which doesn't exist anymore. It was in the this was maybe 1989, 1990, right? It was a while ago. And so whatever got a junior in college to drive themselves down to this conference, I have no idea, but I decided to go. And I heard from these people who are really starting to just get known, like Andrew Weil and Deepak Chopra and Joan Borisenko. And I mean, literally my mind was blown. I was like, what is this thing called holistic medicine? Because I grew up with an OBGYN mom, right? It was pretty conventional. And so I remember at that point, I called my mom and I said, Mom, I think I want to be a naturopathic doctor. And, and I told her about this college called Bastyr, and she was like, "What's that?" And that was kind of the common refrain especially back then, where, being an ND really wasn't as common. And she didn't discourage me. Nobody discouraged me. She would have supported whatever I wanted to do. But a lot of people said, "Why don't, maybe you should, if you really want to be a doctor, maybe you go get your MD first." And so that's what I did because, the steps were not quite as clear to me, and I didn't like any of it.
Wow.
I mean, I remember even in med school, I tell this story like every single year in med school, starting from my first year there, I would go to the dean of medical students and say, "I don't think this is for me. I don't see what I want to do for the rest of my life." And she would say, "Just stick it out one more year or wait till your clinical years, or, oh, you're a fourth year. You only have 1 year left. You might as well finish." And so it was just this thing, and the same thing in residency. It was interesting, and I love that we could put out fires and help kids in crisis, but it was really disheartening to see, the number of kids who were just really, even at that time, getting sicker and sicker. And I mean, another flyer, landed like right on my lap. At that point, it was the flyer for the Center for Mind Body Medicine Food as Medicine Conference in Berkeley. Back in 19, I want to say it was maybe 2000 or 2001. So almost 20 years ago. And again, mind blown. What is this concept called food as medicine? Like, it really matters that much. And I heard, a young Mark Hyman talk. And it totally changed my trajectory. So I really think like these 2 points, interventions, that just, whatever divine intervention, informed what I want to learn, how I want to practice, what kind of pediatrician I want to be. And so, I mean, here I am. When I opened up my practice in 2004, it was as an integrative functional pediatric practice, and just so grateful to have been able to navigate this path. But it's been a lonely path at times, and I'm so glad that there are more and more pediatricians and family practice docs who are pursuing this route. But we need so many more. I mean, we need so many more practitioners who are really willing to see children and take this on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, your book is very welcomed, in our space. I mean, it's needed. To your point, as you and I were dialoguing via email and just back and forth before I hit record, um, all of us have huge questions all of the time, on the black
Mhm.
box that is our pediatric patients, or, how do we dose? What labs do we do? I mean,
Mhm,
honestly,
mhm.
they're such common questions. And so just for those listening, first of all, go to the show notes, all of the appropriate links and, links to any papers that we reference, all of the stuff will be over there along with the transcript. And then, we'll just, and the book, of course, and then I will ping Dr. Song to, nail her down for thoughts on dosing and labs and so forth as we move through this, because I
Yes.
know that that's like the number one question that we always face in this space. That's
In the
an
book, guys, I mean, I know this is a practitioner podcast. I wrote this book for practitioners so that you don't have to spend all that much time explaining to your patients and families why their microbiome is so important, how to get kids on board, to really supporting their microbiomes. And I have dosing and test guidelines in there. And of course, happy to talk is more because that is one of the biggest questions. Well, how do I dose for kids? How do I extrapolate from adult research into this child in front of me, which, it's really not a perfect science there because we know kids aren't little adults, but sometimes it's the best that we have. And
Yes.
what I hope to be able to offer is, some of that research, some of the kid specific research. And also, since I've been doing this for 20 years, there's just so
Yeah, of
much,
course.
clinical
Ton of
experience in all of this.
experience. Yeah. I mean, still one of my favorite resources is the Pangborn Baker book. If anybody
Yes.
can get it, it's very old at this time, but of course, Sid Baker is like the father of functional
Yes.
pediatrics, right? And he had all sorts of pearls in that old book. We'll link to that as well on the show notes, just in case you might be able to scrounge up a copy somewhere. Why? So let's get to it. Um, where kids are actually expected to have a shorter lifespan than us. I mean, what the heck is
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah. I mean, and that paper was from 2005. That was almost 20 years ago, right? I
Where
mean,
are we at now?
I
Yeah,
mean,
go.
we are not any better. That should have been a wake-up call. And if we don't wake up, I mean, life is not going to be looking good for our families. I mean, I hope to be a grandma one day. I want life to be rosy for them. I want them to know that having something not quite right with them is not normal, right? And that's the biggest, I think the one of the most tragic things I see today is, for a lot of parents and families who are younger now, they don't realize what quote normal should look like. It's quote normal for a kid to be super fussy and colicky as an infant, or oh yeah, they have a little eczema here and there. That's totally normal for kids, right? Or, oh, they're wheezing every once in a while. That's normal. They have some anxiousness or behavior concerns or sensory concerns. All of that we've kind of normalized in our society. And, we need to step back and think, well, really, really and truly, is that normal? And I will say, I mean, I am in my 50s now, and absolutely no. When I was in medical school, I still distinctly remember one of my attendings telling me, you should never, ever put anything stronger than hydrocortisone 1% on the face, right? And never, ever in the diaper area. And now we have kids who are lathered with, I mean, triamcinolone and, just stronger and stronger steroids all over their bodies, right? To the point that one of my patients, it was a new patient who came to me, and he was in adrenal crisis because of the topical steroids he was placed on, not even oral, right? And another patient who, was being hospitalized frequently for IV steroids and antibiotic IV for her super infections, and was about to be put on cyclosporin for her eczema. I mean, this is not okay. And so For practitioners, we just really want to step back and think, well, why on earth is this happening? And the same thing with adults, right? We've seen in the adult population, I mean, really since the late 1900s, this explosion of chronic disease in kids and for children. I mean, nearly 1 in 2 kids has some sort of a chronic diagnosis today, and that number's climbing. The
Wow.
8 in 10 adults. I mean, this during the pandemic, the World Health Organization. I remember this flyer, this image that was posted that 8 in 10 people worldwide will die of NCDs. I never
Mm.
heard of NCDs before the pandemic.
Right,
Stands for,
right.
right? It's non-communicable diseases. So not infectious diseases, but entirely lifestyle related diseases. And so our kids are heading
But
that way.
let me just put a pin, like, or just state that we've swung back to bringing communicable diseases into the mix, with the advent of
Mhm.
COVID, and the same lifestyle factors are dictating poor outcomes
Yeah.
to that. So it's almost like we've gone in a rather tragic, full circle.
Yeah. I mean, it's absolutely. And so, I mean, let's talk about poor outcomes in COVID. There was one paper, Dr. Sabina Hazan, who noted and found that people with poor COVID outcomes, it was correlated with lack of bifidobacteria in their gut, in their microbiomes,
In
right?
adults.
In adults.
Interesting.
I would love to do research around this, but I fully believe that so many of our kids who are presenting very early on in life with chronic health concerns, it is due to this loss of bifidobacteria. And why is bifidobacteria so important? I mean, we know there's so many health benefits for kids and for adults, but one of the major benefits is supporting our butyrate producing microbes like FPROW, right? Which you
Yeah.
can measure
Yeah.
on
Yeah. Yeah.
some, like, with the Genova GI effects, you can see how much FPROW, how much Akkermansia you have. And so, with bifidobacteria being depleted, and we can talk about, why that is, right? And
Yes.
now these butyrate producing species also being depleted. I mean, butyrate is one of our master regulators of overall health in kids and for adults. So, and there's not, unfortunately, just yet, there's not an amazing way to get butyrate into kids because it's just awful smelling and tasting, right? But yes, you can take butyrate as a compound, but butyrate is one of our most important postbiotics. So a fermentation product, of our probiotics in our microbiome. So, I mean, it would be awesome to have more innate production of butyrate, with the help of our microbiome. And so, some of the factors, I think, when we look back at what period in time chronic diseases really started to increase, it was, it's probably in the late, 1960s, 1970s that we really saw a more rapid increase. When we look at, ANA rates, positivity rates in distinct age groups, there was one study, this was just last year, that looked at, different age groups through the decades and found that the group with the most rapid rise in ANA positivity rates were our teenagers, 12 to 19 years of age.
Interesting.
And from the late, I think it was the 80s to about the early 2000s, the rates doubled in our teenagers. And then from then until now, rates have tripled. And so, there's something going on. And when we look at what changed dramatically in those late 1900s, it's our food. I mean, our food and psychological stress. I think those are the two things that really we can't underscore how dramatically different that is. And in fact, in my book, I write about, 1953, as I think that is one of the pivotal dates. And what was 1953? It was the year that Swanson came out with its first TV dinner tray, right? On aluminum, no less,
Wow.
right? But it was the first TV dinner tray that within a year was selling like millions of units because who did they target? The stressed out mom who didn't have enough time to, cook and be the superwoman. And wow, you could get in 10, 15 minutes, just like home cooked meals on the table for your family, right? I mean, way to tug at a mother's heartstrings, right? Well, in that original Swanson dinner TV tray has won a spot in the Smithsonian Institute of National Sciences, an honor for forever changing the way Americans think about food. I mean, think about
Wow.
that. Think about that. And ever since then, think about the explosion of, ready to eat, frozen dinners and, packaged
Yeah.
foods, and which have since then become more and more ultra processed. And we can see that in the literature, many of the FDA food additives, which, by the way, there are over 3,000 food additives in this list that they call everything added to food in the United States. I mean, it's like kind of comical, but 3,000. And many, many of them we know can directly trigger zonulin release and cause leaky gut. Many of them directly can cause gut dysbiosis. And what we've seen also is this surge in psychological stress in our populations, the busyness of our modern world, which is why many families need to use, packaged foods and frozen dinners, because we're so busy. But that busyness and inability to engage our vagus nerve, engage the gut brain connection, also, I really think has directly impacted our microbiomes. And, one study found that the heart rate variability of children today is much lower than the heart rate variability of historical controls of children in the past.
Wow.
Right.
Can you give me numerical data on
I
that?
don't
Like
have, I'll
guesstimated?
pull up
I'm
the
just
paper, but
curious.
yeah.
Okay, we'll
Um,
grab it and pop it in the show notes, you guys.
so
Fascinating.
it's fascinating. And, one, and let's get back to bifidobacteria. I want someone to write a paper or a book just on,
Well, let me.
I want a book on bifidobacteria, but, there's a microbiologist, I want to say he was from Scotland, who actually measured the microbiomes of
Yeah.
breastfed infants back then 100 years ago,
Mhm.
and formula-fed infants, and found that the breastfed infants had nearly 100% bifidobacteria in their
Yes. I
microbiomes,
was just
right?
going to ask you that.
Yep.
Yes.
Fast forward now, and when we look at the gut microbiomes of breastfed babies versus formula-fed babies, the gut microbiomes of our breastfed babies today look much more similar to the formula-fed babies of 100 years ago. So we can see the significant change.
Mhm.
So, I think all of the
So
downstream
even
effects.
our healthiest
Mhm.
cohort, the breastfed babies,
Yeah.
are
Yep.
looking, like the less healthy cohort of 100 years ago. That's a really astute point.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
much incredible information is being generated by, sort of the bifido gut immune axes, the microbiome immune axis. Like I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but bifido is key in the establishment of tolerance, for example, like really early on.
Yep.
And that would influence, of course, allergic disease, which is totally rampant, and autoimmunity and probably the neurodevelopmental stuff that you had referenced earlier. I'm sure this
Yeah.
whole loss of tolerance or inadequate tolerance, because it sort of exists on a continuum.
Well, and that could be, I mean, there are studies on particular bifido infantis that
Yeah.
is readily available on the market. And it points to that loss of tolerance and, the protective nature of this B infantis in reducing our allergic atopic risk in infants and children, which we know is so high right now. I mean, the
Massive.
number of kids who need EpiPens, and, 1 in 5 kids has eczema, 1 in 10 has asthma. What's interesting, though, is bifidobacteria need in that infant microbiome our human milk oligosaccharides to thrive. And so, I wish that this particular company would combine the
Yes,
bifido we have human milk
that's
oligosaccharide
right.
analogs, right, that are
Mhm.
available in the market. So
Yeah.
2-fucosyl-lactose is the most prevalent HMO. They're called HMOs,
Mhm.
found in breast milk. So I think that, the benefits right now, when they first came out, they said that this probiotic was only for breastfed babies, and that's why, right? But even formula-fed babies or, infants who are supplemented with formula, they can absolutely have that benefit if they also have a source of 2FL.
And I think that there are some formulas now savvy to that and adding
Mhm.
those human milk oligosaccharides.
Yeah.
Boy, if anybody is listening here that wants to jump on an incredible probiotic combination, it's just, yeah,
Yeah.
that it's huge. All right. So I just want to, so there's this movement into processed foods. I mean, and of course, we just blogged on it. I just want to throw it out there. We just blogged on ultra processed foods and the fact that the damage that they're now associating with the ingestion of them really is dwarfing the impact of smoking, believe it or not. Like
Yeah.
they're really starting to quantify the toxicity of these, 3,000 plus chemicals that we're ingesting. And that mom whose breast milk is less effective, even though it's still incredibly essential, is probably consuming these so-called foods. I feel like we need to put them in quotes. I was talking to my,
Yes, they
to
have, yeah,
Rommel,
air quotes.
yeah,
Food. I
food.
mean,
Yeah, it's not. They shouldn't even be allowed to be sold in
yeah.
grocery stores. They shouldn't be considered food. We should pack them like we should treat them like alcohol, in Connecticut where there's all sorts of
Oh my gosh, wouldn't
regulations, or
that be amazing,
wouldn't
right?
that be, yeah. So these
Mhm.
so-called foods that we're consuming and that are damaging us and influencing, our microbiome negatively and allowing the onset of these, these illnesses, these conditions.
Well,
Um,
and that's where, one of the things I think is I truly think one of the most important things that we can teach our kids and our families is how to be savvy food label readers. I think that is hands down if we can do that because it's not necessarily a reality for most that they can home cook every single thing.
yeah.
And ultra processed foods doesn't mean every single packaged food. And so, recognizing how to really be savvy and understanding that even the foods that, you know, moms, practitioners were doing our best, there are certain aha moments of like, oh my gosh, I didn't realize that that ingredient is one that I should avoid. Like, mono and diglycerides are one that I'm like, avid about telling my kids if you see that, you gotta run away because that is gonna wreck your microbiome and your immune system, but I think that could change the trajectory of our whole future, the world's health, and it's so important.
That's fascinating. And we need to circle back and come to the medications, but give me the top list of must avoids if we're going to be savvy label readers, because, and also, what are the packaged foods that are reasonable?
Yeah. So that's I mean, that is one of the keys, right? And it's just that now and the other thing too is I will also because now there's a lot of pushback from certain groups about, of course we don't want to label any food blanketly bad or good. And we want our kids to have healthy relationships with foods, but at the same time, there are foods that are outright just really not good for you.
Horrible. I mean,
Right?
again, quote, like it's not food. So
Yes.
yeah, to your point, we do need to be mindful, but we also need to call a spade a spade. This
Yes.
isn't food,
Yeah.
and these greater powers that be have ushered it in under the food heading and created this, false sense of acceptability and
Yes.
safety, and it's
Yes.
not,
Yes. I mean, we
so
should be outraged at
yeah,
what the FDA allows in
yes,
in our food, but also our babies' food and our kids' food.
yes,
And
yes.
and part of that is, I mean, when we look at it, if children had a balance of really amazing microbiome nourishing foods almost all the time, and then every once in a while, like this, the rainbow colored unicorn frappuccino thing snuck in, that'd be one thing. But, some of the studies have shown that children and teenagers consume at least like, is it 2/3 of their diet as ultra processed foods? And, for adults, I mean, this study was adults, but found that 50% of their sugar intake now is in the form of these sugar sweetened beverages like boba teas and frappuccinos and, sodas and all of that. For some teenagers, it's at least that, right? I have teenagers who, I mean, they're going to Starbucks or boba with their friends every day after school. And I will tell you, our kids' bodies, their metabolism, their metabolic health has changed. I mean, I as a pediatrician, as an integrated pediatrician, I do way more lab work than most pediatricians, right? But whenever I have the opportunity to check a fasting blood sugar, a fasting glucose, and hemoglobin A1C, the kids who are showing now signs of insulin resistance and tipping towards type 2 diabetes, they are in my practice, they are not fitting that mold of being overweight or obese or sedentary. These are healthy, quote, healthy on the outside, active athletes, slim, who are showing their insulin is either outright high or they're right at like 17 or 18, right?
Wow.
I mean, so we really need to think about what this is doing doesn't matter necessarily what you look on the outside. This is not about how you look. It's not about the number on the scale, but really about being metabolically healthy, even for our children. And I would say, especially for our children.
That's
Um,
extraordinary.
right. And so I will say for practitioners, if you can, get a fasting lab order, check that because
Yeah.
I mean, knowing how inflammatory sugar is and how much of a risk insulin resistance plays in virtually every single chronic disease you can imagine. If
This
we can,
Well, I was just going to say, maybe this seems like I mean, this certainly could be the crux of why our kids are going to die earlier than us. I mean, this, looking at Nathan Price was at the Institute for Systems Biology, and he published this pretty cool analysis looking at different conditions and biological age, and diabetes was like ahead of the pack,
yeah,
just
yeah,
massively. So if you're moving along that metabolic, continuum, you're just aging at this radically accelerated rate, and that's the gatekeeper
yeah,
for all the other conditions. I mean,
yeah,
it's mind-blowing to me that you're seeing insulin, that high,
uh,
in kids.
yeah.
Ah,
I used to be shocked at first, and
okay.
now I'm not so shocked. But that's why I check, right? Because if we don't check, especially in our children who don't seem to be at risk, right?
Mhm.
We're not going to know. We're not going to be able to move the needle on their health and practice true prevention. Even liver enzymes are like bumping up against really not acceptable levels for many quote healthy fit kids. And so this
What are
is
you
it's
seeing? Like, when do you, what's bumping up against an unhealthy level for you? What are you
well, I mean, I
seeing?
do see some kids with an ALT of over 40, right? And AST is in the 30s. And so, it's just you gotta look at that and say, well, why why does this kid have, high normal or high liver enzymes?
Yeah,
It's gotta be
like
at
early
least in
fatty
large part
liver.
due to the sugar, right?
Mhm.
Um, and so what I really encourage practitioners to do is present the data and sometimes it sounds scary and, we do sometimes wanna have that shock factor,
Mhm.
but, in an empathetic, educational way because once kids understand and I talk to kids too, right? You gotta talk to the kids to have them on board, even if they're young. You just try to, frame it in a, age appropriate way, but, I'll just say a couple of studies that really for I mean, if it's shocking for me, I want it to be shocking for parents and kids. So this one study found that ultra-processed foods can change the brain morphology in kids, so they have smaller cerebral white matter, right? So their brain is shrinking. I mean, I tell kids this, right? Um, versus, I mean, they also looked at higher quality diet and found that a higher quality diet improved IQ, improved brain gyrification, and cerebral gray matter, right? I
That's
mean, how crazy is that, right? And for kids who eat a more steady diet of junk food when they're toddlers, junk food, they are significantly more likely to have behavioral problems by the time they're 7 and later on be diagnosed with things like ADHD or anxiety or depression. So these are kid studies. I mean, we want to really, discuss kids specifically. And what I tell kids and teenagers, because especially teenagers and those preteens, right? They're all about, I want to be independent, make my own decisions. I mean, I'm right there with my kids. They're 12 and 14, right?
mhm.
And we talk about, I mean, what do they want? They want their independence. They want power over their own bodies and their brains. So I talk to them about the fact that, there are a gazillion like mad food scientists behind the scenes in these industries, and they are purposefully, figuring out food additive combinations to trick their brains into thinking that they want more and more and more. Like that is not control over their bodies or their brains. And so if they really want that control, they need to be informed and make educated decisions about what they want to put into their mouths. So, I think it's so important for us to also, a lot of practitioners have hesitations about working with kids because they have to work with the parents and the kids, and it's just more work. But it can be so empowering, especially if you can frame things in a language that the kids will understand and embrace. And also know how to break it up. Like you can't do like a 20-minute lecture or you break it up. And then if you start to see the eyes wandering, then okay, that's it for today. All right,
Yeah.
we can talk about it next time.
Well, I'll just shout out to any practitioners anxious about working with kids. Your chart notes will be a lot shorter because their health history is way abbreviated.
Yes. Well, and
I mean,
also
there's yeah, go
another
ahead.
plug, kids don't have the decades of
Yeah,
toxic crap
yeah,
that have just, dysregulated their nervous systems and their immune systems in their gut. And so kids respond
quick.
faster. I mean, you will have so many rewards working with children.
Yes.
A shorter journey to healing for kids than it is for adults.
This episode is supported by Practice Better, a leading all-in-one practice management platform. Most health and wellness professionals love what they do, but feel overwhelmed with time-consuming administrative tasks. With Practice Better, you can automate tasks like onboarding, scheduling, charting, nutrition planning, and billing to help you better focus on the parts of your practice you love. New Frontiers listeners get 20% off the first 4 months of any paid plan at practicebetter.io with code KF20. Visit the podcast page on drkarafitzgerald.com for more information.
As we go deeper into the world of longevity science, I want to introduce you to a company rewriting the rules of skincare. Founded by 4 PhDs in skin science, OneSkin has developed a peptide scientifically proven to address cellular aging. By targeting senescent cells, their OS01 peptide helps skin look, feel, and behave younger, visibly reducing lines and wrinkles and improving skin's texture and overall appearance. To learn more about their groundbreaking approach, visit oneskin.co. That's ONESKIN.co. And there's really something satisfying about working with the whole family, and
Mhm.
getting the family. And I mean, because you're not going to successfully treat a kid if you don't have the primary caregivers. Actually, all of them kind of enrolled in the journey. And even sometimes siblings have participated in work that I've done in my practice. And the other piece, you mentioned, or when I was reading your bio, that you use essential oils and homeopathy. I mean, I think
Mhm.
kids are really potentially more responsive to some of these as adjunct components of their care.
Yeah, and it's
Um,
so much easier to use in some of the herbs or supplements, right? I mean,
yes.
I integrate them all, but using learning how to use homeopathy and essential oils for kids can be really, really rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I have the big boron blue box at home for
Yep.
for my daughter. Um, all right, what do I want to say? There's you've unpacked a ton of stuff. There's so many directions we can go. I mean, we just all need to have your book on our shelves, but why don't I want to talk about these processed foods again, the ultra processed, like what we really need to be
Oh, yeah, yeah.
avoiding.
Yep.
But there is a profound addictive quality to your
Mhm.
point, to trying to wake your own children up to getting that these guys are working on you to own you, just, like the opioid crisis that we're in
Yes.
with adults. I mean, it's incredibly similar.
Yeah.
So how do we deal with that? How do we back our kids out of it? I mean, they're so profoundly addictive. And you're right. They're the Dayglow unicorn stuff, or they're just designed to feed it. Like my daughter would live on whatever that is, whatever
Yeah.
that thing is.
That's right.
Anyway.
I know. I mean, no, once they're not, toddlers anymore, infants anymore, and we lose control over everything that goes on their plate and in their mouths, it can be it can be really stressful for families. And so, that's where even just I mean, when you go to the grocery store and kids kind of grab those little the of course, like the SpongeBob covered, fruit roll up thing, right? I mean, I've encouraged parents to have conversations about, well, let's read the label together. I mean, do it even when they're toddlers. Oh, let's look. Wow, I don't think this is something you want to put into your body, right? And like just talk about why. Um, but we also have to recognize the addictive quality of it as
Yeah,
parents. I mean, think about how many of us as parents are addicted to X, Y, and Z,
yeah,
packaged food. I had one mom, just really, bashfully admitting in how addicted she was to Ritz crackers when she was younger, right? And so we have to, give ourselves some grace, and especially our children, and recognize it is not easy when you're addicted to something to give it up. And there is going to be a point of withdrawal, right? So,
yeah,
doing it slowly, it's not going to work to do it cold turkey. And it's also It's the, sugar substitutes, right? The artificial sugar substitutes. I mean, one study this was in rats, mind you, but it found that, I would say virtually everyone has seen the pictures of the scans of the sugar lighting up the same centers of your brain, the reward centers as cocaine. Well, in rats who were already addicted to cocaine, they chose saccharin over cocaine. I mean, that's frightening, right? And so, I'd love them to repeat that with all the other, artificial sweeteners that are now in, like, the energy drinks, like Prime that all these kids want and whatever the thing is, right? With sucralose and acetylsulfame potassium. I mean, those, you know 'cause by now, adults and kids, I mean, I would say you'd have to be, really living under a rock to not know that, "Oh, we don't want too much sugar." I mean, that's like just like eat a rainbow. I mean, that's so cliche now almost, right?
Mhm.
But really a lot of kids now and adults unwittingly are choosing these zero sugar drinks because they think, "Well, at least it's not sugar." Well, I don't know a single study that has proven that artificial sweeteners, zero sugars, artificial sweeteners actually reduce your risk of metabolic disease, right?
Mhm.
And I don't, and they're so addictive, and so, many will disrupt the gut microbiome, like sucralose and acetylsulfame potassium, and so what are on my top list to
Run from.
avoid, right?
Yeah,
And, in the book, I go through all the top because we can't memorize all of these, right?
sure.
But I do mention some of the top ones. So food emulsifiers, I think, have to be way, way, way up there, on the list of knowing how to avoid them. And, food emulsifiers, I explain to kids and parents, that's the ingredient, the additive that keeps your food from becoming a goopy, separated mess. It keeps things together. And you'll find them in some protein bars, in ice creams, in, even in infant ready to feed formula, it's allowed. And so, what are these? They're, I mentioned mono and diglycerides. There's carboxymethylcellulose, so CMC, carrageenan are some of the top ones, polysorbate 80. Um, xanthan gum, it has been found in premature infants to disrupt their gut microbiomes. I am on the fence. I think that things like guar gum, can be a source of fiber and, can support the microbiome. So I don't say a definite no to those. But if you see any of those, really choose another packaged item. Of course, anything that has says artificial, we just know to put that back. Doesn't matter what artificial thing it is; it's fake, right? So we just put it back. But especially colors. So I mean, there's not completely compelling evidence about the harm that colors do to your microbiome. There's some, but we know how harmful it can be for children's developing brains and the correlations um, with attention and behavioral problems, so much so that there's warnings in European foods with artificial dyes that they can affect your children's attention and behavior. So any of those artificial colors we want to keep out. Um, I do teach kids how to read and look for added sugars in the packaged foods and recognize that according to the CDC and American Heart Association, they should have no more than 25 grams of added sugar. And I do, fun games. I have them visualize, 1 teaspoon of sugar is about 4 grams. So when you pick up a package of food or when you go to boba tea and you have and it has, let's say Starbucks, there actually is a Frappuccino that has 54 grams of added sugar, right? So just imagine, okay, 54 grams of added sugar in that. You could probably down that Frappuccino in like 5 minutes. It goes down really easily, right? Well, that is going to be about, am I doing my math right? Is 13 teaspoons of sugar. Could you sit there and spoon in 13 teaspoons of white sugar? Not that quickly.
In 5 minutes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right. And so just kind of, really making it visual and,
Mhm.
making it concrete for them, super helpful. Um, and then, everyone knows about glyphosate, but, I also tell parents that and kids that look, glyphosate, it's also, was patented as an antibiotic. And just like we don't take antibiotics unnecessarily, why would you want to take an antibiotic in your food unnecessarily? And so, trying to really choose as organically as possible. And when that's not possible, we want to kind of surround that food with as many, colorful fruits and vegetables that will help us clear the glyphosate. There are certain probiotic strains that can help clear the glyphosate. So, when it's not possible to eat organically, then we want to support our ability to detoxify that from our system.
In my patient population, which is mostly adults, I see now, so I've been practiced for probably about 15 years. The last 4 new patients, I just popped this into a slide for a lecture that I'm going to deliver, is they all came to me with elevated mercury. And these are smart, healthy, these are health
Yeah.
conscious individuals, so we're seeing, it's mind blowing because I didn't see that before. And this is coming from fish. And they know to get wild caught. So I think things are becoming more contaminated, but this is sort of a long-winded way of just asking you, are you looking at toxins in kids? Is that something that we should be measuring in them? Should we be doing like a vibrant urine panel and looking for glyphosate levels and so forth? And, or, blood tests for, we should, obviously we need to do a periodic lead and so forth at certain timeframes, but what are your thoughts around actually measuring?
I don't typically measure toxins outright to start with, right? Even, unless there is, I'm not even going to say unless there is, it's not my first line round of testing. My first line is going to be blood work for, nutrient levels. Depending on the history, if I'm concerned about, chronic pathogens, I might check for that. I do try to get, fasting, as I said, fasting insulin and fasting glucose. I do like to check thyroid function tests, or the complete, TSH, free T4, free T3, reverse T3. If they're older, if they're sort of tweens and teens, I do check an ANA and thyroid antibodies because they are surprisingly elevated, like minimally elevated in many, too many of our kids. And so I'll start with lab work, and I typically start with a comprehensive stool analysis and also the metabolomics, a urine organic acid panel. So that's my start. Now, for kids who don't have any particular health concerns, those are the kids who come in with, for consultations for whatever health concerns they have. And then, if there's concerns about, yes, was clear water damage, of course, I'll check mycotoxins. But for your kind of general healthy kid as you're entering puberty and adolescence, when I can chat with them about, hey, this is an amazing time. Your body's going through so many changes. You are doing, such an amazing job growing, and we want to give your body the best chance to grow as optimally as it can. This is a great opportunity to check some labs to see, well, what can we, fine tune to really get you fully on your path to being, the healthiest young adult that you can be. So, for my quote healthy kids, that's a great opportunity to, check at their annual visit, order some labs to really be able to do that. And then that's everything I'll include, because most kids need more zinc, have low red blood cell zincs. Many have suboptimal and deficient RBC magnesiums. Many have low ferritin or suboptimally low ferritin. These are the same things that we might see in adults, but I really want to know that, especially zinc. Zinc is really important for testosterone production in boys. Yeah. So we want to optimize that for our boys. It's really important for immune health and sensory issues and nervous system issues. Of course, we all know the benefits of magnesium. And I've it's a rare child that has, optimal levels of vitamin D.
Yes, that's right.
So, right. And so, there are all these different things that we can check. I don't typically check a homocysteine on children until they're kind of later into their adolescent years, because I've just not found young children and middle school age kids to have elevated or suboptimally high homocysteines. That takes a while. I will, though, on their urine organic acid test, sometimes see an elevated methylmalonic acid and FIGLU. So those can be my measures for methylation as opposed to a blood homocysteine.
And those are looking at folks, methylmalonic is B12 and FIGLU is folate. Are you measuring, what other nutrients are you measuring in whole blood, out of curiosity? Are you looking at, RBC folate or serum folate? Are you
Not
measuring
as my first round, because also with kids, there's only a certain amount of blood you can take
That's
at
right.
one time,
That's
right?
That's
And the
right.
younger you are, and some labs are much bigger sticklers about I can only take this
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
The other thing to know too, just, if you haven't ordered blood tests on children, I would strongly encourage prescribing EMLA cream, lidocaine, prilocaine numbing cream to use
Awesome.
before the blood draw, because if that first blood draw is really traumatic, you may not get another blood draw for a very long time. Right. So you instruct parents and kids to use the magic cream, right?
Yeah.
To numb their elbows, have it be a seamless experience. They can watch Dora I'm talking about my son at
Yeah.
3.5. We did lab work and he happily watched Dora the whole time while he's just looking like, what's going on my arm here, right? So using EMLA, preparing kids for if it's a quite extensive blood draw, you might need to prioritize and break it down into 2 blood draws. I
And
also,
and
yep,
just store it
and just
appropriately.
store it.
Good.
And I recommend for parents, if there are some unusual labs, or right now all the labs around me, they're used to what I order, so it's not a problem. But if not, then have parents go to the lab first without the child, so they can show the lab requisition to the phlebotomist. They can get all the tubes ready, so that your child isn't waiting for an hour while they're kind of trying to figure out the test codes in the labs, the which tubes to use. So we want to these are just little practical. They seem like little
Yeah.
things, but if you
They're
can make that
huge.
experience easier, it makes it so much more successful, and it makes what you can do, for that child, so much better.
The one other addition, those are awesome pearls. The numbing cream is like, oh my God, that's so brilliant. Just, yeah. But the other thing is that we can check in. I've had parents call the lab and find out, who's the really amazing kid drawer,
Yes.
phlebotomist,
Yes, 100%.
Yeah. Because that's the difference between success and failure, or it can be as
Yep.
well. Wow, really, really good tips, because you're right. Yeah, we can't order the massive, 32 tube panels that are tube lab slips that we send our adults in with. So yeah, leaning on the urine and stool, those are definitely doable. Okay. All right, that's all good. What are like some of your top supplements? Like what are most kids, and what forms do you use, and what brands do you like? Like you're going to have to go with chewables or liquids or something,
Mhm.
so most kids are on X, Y, and Z. The forms I'm using X, Y, and Z. Talk about those.
Yeah. So, I will preface this by saying that, one of the biggest shifts that has occurred in my practice is I used to recommend that every patient take a daily probiotic, and I'm not necessarily doing that anymore. I'm really trying to be more targeted in what probiotics and which strains kids are taking, and targeted in their use. So of course, after antibiotics, I have kids take a really broad spectrum probiotic for at least a month or two, um, but what's really even more important than that is making sure that they're feeding their microbes so that they want to come back. And I tell kids the example of you know it's not these are not like Jack's Magic Beanstalks. You can't just throw a whole handful of probiotics. You can't even throw 100 trillion, colonies every day into your gut and expect them to want to stick around. If, like when you grow your tomato plant outside, you have to make sure the soil has the right nutrients. It's getting just the right amount of water and sunlight. And so we need to be able to create an ecosystem that our probiotics actually want to stay in. And if your kids will have fermented foods and can get in, all of their fiber and phytonutrients to act as prebiotics, that's going to go so much further in recolonizing your gut, no matter what the case is. And to be honest, the pediatric data on specific strains is really, it's lacking, for a lot of indications. We do have, there are some probiotic strains that are like there's one 4-strain combination that, IFF, which used to be DuPont, and they're using a lot of probiotic supplements. There are some pediatric studies on microbiome restoration after antibiotics. So that's great.
Interesting.
There are a couple of other strains that are specific for that. We know that there are certain psychobiotic strains that are better at supporting optimal serotonin and dopamine levels. So when I have a kiddo who has anxiety or depression or OCD or whatever it is, ADHD, I will have them try to really create that microbiome ecosystem through their diet and lifestyles, and then supplement with these specific psychobiotics. So
And what
a
are
little
those? What are
shift.
those?
So there are, I'm going to look these up. So one of them that is fascinating is called Neurali PS128. And so that there's only one company that makes it though, unfortunately. It's Bened Life. And so I love that I can talk about products. Because when you do these CME talks, you can't, and you're
You
like
can't.
trying to
That's
say,
right.
right?
I know. I know. You just get in the habit of talking around, but
I
yeah,
totally do.
yeah.
Yeah. So, so anyhow, so that's Bened Life, has this PS128 strain, which over 3 months was found to significantly reduce autism-related symptoms and improve sociability. They're actually starting to look at it now for Parkinson's. They've looked at it for even sports performance. So that's one psychobiotic strain. Another psychobiotic strain is Lactobacillus paracasei LPC37.
Interesting.
Which you can now you look for these in those in the supplements. There are 2 Roselle strains. There's Lactobacillus helveticus Roselle 52, and then Bifidobacterium longum Roselle 175. So those are 2 other psychobiotics that have been shown to support neurotransmitter levels. And then and I have used this combination of these 2 psychobiotics and the PS128 in one child who we were trying all the, I'm going to say the quote usual things for OCD. So high dose inositol, theanine, N-acetylcysteine, omega 3s. It wasn't until we added these 3 strains that the mom said, this is really starting to make a difference. So who knows if it was a synergy of also all the other supplements, but it was clearly, the introduction of these 3 that moved the needle for her debilitating OCD. And then, Microbiome Labs has their psychobiotic. It's the Bifidobacterium longum 1714. I don't have a lot of experience using it, although at the last conference I was speaking at, one of the audience members, practitioners came up to me and said that they'd started using this one on their child with anxiety and thought that it was really helping. So that's just anecdotally.
Nice. Okay, so what about, is everybody on vitamin D? Do you give
Oh yeah.
vitamin D
Okay. So
with
now,
K,
yes,
omega 3?
thank you.
And by the way, we don't have too much time, so we're kind of at the,
Yeah.
we'll move through your workhorse list.
So the other, I would consider the staple supplements and omega-3. There is really hardly a child who has enough omega-3 fatty acids in their system. Vitamin D3. If they're older, I'll add the K2, but if they're an infant, they can just do the D3. That's fine. So, and I've been on the hunt for a really high quality children's multivitamin. There's not one that I'm like super excited about, which is why I'm actually just, as a prelude, hopefully in the fall, I'm working with some contract manufacturers to try to create my dream multivitamin for kids and their microbiomes. So,
That's
a
great.
comprehensive, because when we're thinking about what we're feeding and putting into our kids, it should be with the lens of, well, what are we feeding their microbiome, right? Because their microbiome is
Sure.
what's helping to keep them, healthier and happier. So a multi right now, what do I use? You can, the Douglas Labs has a pretty good, what is it called? Their ultra preventive gummy that's pretty tolerable for kids that, they enjoy the flavor. And then Zymogen, their active nutrients chewable, that's pretty good too. That the flavor, I will say, some people can taste the bees in it, right? You know how bees just tend to make things a little bit more bitter, but it is what it is. Those are our options. For kids, I do sometimes use Clear Labs Vita Spectrum powder. That's a hard sell though, palate wise. But some kids it's not. And then when you really need to have even more methylation support for, let's say, your autistic kids, that is a good one. So D, multi, and fish oil are my foundations. And then depending on what else is going on, of course, I love SPMs. That is my hands down number 1 favorite supplement. For kids and for adults. And so I do put many kids on SPMs.
Specialized pro-resolving lipid mediators, you guys, these are derivatives coming from the fish oil. And actually, I have a podcast with Charles Sirhan, the guy that discovered them. If you really want a drill down, it's ridiculously fascinating. But
You have to
they're
listen to that episode, guys. It is one of the best episodes ever. And I
Thank you.
refer like all my practitioners to that episode on SPMs, and it's fascinating. I refer
Interesting.
patients to it as well, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's pretty technical. So it's for, the science geeky parents and kids. But I mean, as a practitioner, I feel like you must listen because SPMs are so important.
Oh my God, they're just incredible. And he just touches on the sort of the breadth and depth of the science out there on these guys. It's fascinating. All right, so listen, just on that, how are you getting kiddos ingesting fish oil? Like my daughter has a supplement graveyard as much as I do from things she, took for a minute and then just completely rejected. And, fish oil is challenging. And I feel like I'm leaning on ones that right now, the one that she'll eat has sugar, but it still tastes fishy to me. I'm somewhat blown away that she's consuming it. But anyway, what are some of the go-to brands you're finding kids will
The
consume?
two that I think are really tasty, and I will say, because I've tried them all, right?
Yeah.
And the two that are like really, I think, so yummy. They're and I don't say that lightly, right? But Da Vinci, their Kid Omega, it is really good. I mean, I don't taste any fish in there. And also Nutridyne, their Omega liquid as well. I really don't taste any fish in there. So I mean, those
Top
two I would
tips.
try.
That's awesome. That's very good, actually. That's great to know. Liquid, you can get a little more in. Now, the literature, my read on the literature, I mean, you don't need to approach doses for fish oil, like we are in some of our adult patients. What do you put your single digit kids on versus, and then what do you put your adolescents on?
I mean, I'm very generous with fish oil, and honestly, I
Okay.
don't necessarily look. And I have to look at the bottles, but when I think about like little kids, I'll probably put them maybe on like 500 to even 1,000 total.
Okay.
And then for the school age kids, at least 1,000,
Okay.
combined, right? And then there's, some thought as to should you have more EPA or more DHA? And sometimes, I mean, that's even harder to find, the specific one that you might want. But yeah, I mean, and of course, if they had any head injury, which is so much more common, I'm dosing, way higher. If they have anxiety or ADHD, I might be upwards of like, 2 to 5 grams. So.
Okay. So you're right in there with adult doses.
Mhm.
Then liquid is good. I did have success for a little while with the Designs for Health lemon smoothie
The
with
smoothie. So the
Isabella.
smoothie, even that one's a little bit more fishy. Barlean's has their swirls, which is over the counter, not practitioner line, but Barlean's, you can find it easily. They have uh, omega swirls that are smoothies that are actually pretty tasty, but you have to take a lot. A
Uh,
lot. I mean, it's on the order of like 2 tablespoons as
uh,
opposed to 1 teaspoon, right?
okay. Yeah,
But that might be a way to get your kids to have that.
yeah. I mean, you just never, yeah. I mean, like I said, I have a supplement graveyard, so I've moved to
Mhm.
it's been a lot of trial and error in our
Yeah.
journey. Um, okay. Were there any other supplements that you wanted to add in there? I mean, you're doing zinc and mag on a lot of kids.
Yeah, I mean, separately, especially, I mean, I can go by clinical clues. And, in the book, I actually, for parents also to see if they don't have access to blood work or it's just hard to get blood work on kids, some clinical clues for each nutrient deficiency, how it might
Awesome.
present in children. So depending on that, whether if it's just clinical suspicion or actual lab data, then I'll supplement with zinc or magnesium, iron sometimes. So I'll just kind of play it by ear. I do check kids' histamine levels too, and quercetin is a common supplement for me.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, it makes sense. It is in my practice as well. God, we've covered a lot, but I mean, we could just have another conversation. We haven't talked about, there's a lot we need. I don't know, maybe we'll do a follow-up log. Like we haven't talked about antibiotics and, how to use them or treating kids acutely. I mean, it would be fun to kind of
Yeah,
maybe
yeah.
pick this conversation up, but, any last pearls you want to leave folks with? And then we'll just kind of dialogue off air about, maybe a part 2 or a companion piece. It's
I
a
mean,
book we all
yeah.
need to have, but yeah, go
Yeah, I
ahead.
mean, I think that when you work with kids, again, it can be one of the most rewarding things that you do. But especially for kids, we just really, really want to get back to the foundations. I mean, the foundations, like we're doing, with diet and lifestyle, but educate them, educate, and empower, because that's where they're going to make changes. And these foundations are really what they're going to take with them for the rest of their lives. And some of them, I think a lot of us as practitioners might kind of gloss over a bit, because they seem so simplistic. But the simplest things can make the most profound shifts. And the simplest things are often the hardest things to implement. So,
And give me an example. Yeah.
well, just, for instance, with sleep, I mean, getting enough sleep, right? We know how important that is. But I talk to kids about how literally when they don't get enough sleep, parts of their brain matter that are related to memory and reactivity the next day start to shrink,
Mm.
right? And when we're sleep deprived, it takes 2 days of sleep deprivation to disrupt our gut microbiome. It takes 7 days to get that back, right? And so,
Wow.
how do we think about let's really practically sit there, look at the clock, think about how many hours is optimal for you, not for your brother, not for your friend, but for you. And then we're going to think about the lead up to bedtime. I mean, I try to make it really practical.
Mm.
When are we going to start the bedtime routine? How long does it usually take? Do you like to snuggle and have a story and do all that? Then we need to move back even earlier when we're going to start that routine. And try to work around any sleep issues that they might have with supplements or homeopathy or whatever it is. But the more we can make it concrete and spend time on it, because a lot of times we're spending, more time on the supplement protocols and the testing. And yes, that's necessary, many, many times. But if we don't get those foundations and really make sure that those are the things that stick, they may not be able to get off their supplements, right? And,
Yeah,
they
of
may
course.
keep coming back because their problems might resolve temporarily, but they don't fully resolve.
Are you okay with some melatonin in kids?
I am.
Okay,
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
good. And do you cover, like, do we have, the book is covering some of this.
It covers all of it.
All
Yeah.
right.
Like pretty much everything we discussed for sure. Yeah. Yep.
The one thing I wanted to just circle back, the thought that I had, you talked about having to detox, that we need to treat these processed foods as addictions. And in my adult population, when I'm transitioning them into like a low sugar diet from something that's been, packed or off, they're moving into an elimination diet. I talk about the changing of the guards. There's really interesting data out there how the microbiomes change, and those bad bugs will fight for their lives. And that can be part of that detox
Oh,
phenomenon.
yeah.
And I have them, I say, start this on the weekend, and you are just going to give yourself all, you're going to do massages or pedicures. Like you're going to build up. You can take the weekend and binge watch your favorite series. Like I create this thing for them to do that detox process. And I could see doing something similar with kids.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
we'll go to your favorite park, or maybe, Toy X you've been looking at. Does that,
Oh, yeah. I mean, we want to build in positive incentives and
yeah.
rewards that aren't necessarily food related. Right.
Yes,
And
right, right.
and I mean, in a way, we're gamifying it, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we're just making it more exciting and more appealing to do. I think that's really important.
Well, Dr. Song, it's always really great to talk to you, and I do pay attention to your Instagram, so I feel like I'm closer to you.
I
Like
know,
that we
right? So,
haven't,
yeah.
but we'll do a follow-up on this. It's just really important work that you're doing. You're just such a blessing and gift to us here in functional
Oh,
medicine.
thank
So
you.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. Not everybody can be a sponsor on my platform. I appreciate the good work, the relentless research, and the generous support from my friends at Rupa Health, Biotics, Integrative Therapeutics, Timeline, and OneSkin. These are brands I know and trust and use in my clinic and can confidently recommend to you. Please visit them online and let them know you learned about them on New Frontiers. And if it's not too much to ask, consider leaving a thumbs up and a kind review wherever you're listening to New Frontiers. Thanks.